Hello.
Funny how we're holding it.
Yeah, we're all doing exactly the wrong thing. All right.
Great. Bola Binaka, everyone. Good afternoon. In the Pacific, when we say Mbola, we expect to hear it back. So, Mbola, everyone.
Hola.
Thank you so much for coming this afternoon. My name is Charlotte Songo, and I am the Director of Advocacy with the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. Thank you, Liz Marie. We're also hosting this event with South South North, ECAD, the Climate Justice Resilience Fund, the Government of Scotland, and in case you're lost or you might be wondering what this side event is, the title is Counting What Matters, Integrating NELD into Global Climate Action. We have 4 key objectives for this side event. One is to highlight why NELD is as important as economic impacts of loss and damage, to bring frontline experiences to demonstrate the real-life dimensions of non-economic loss and damage, to highlight innovative, locally led and community approaches to address loss and damage, and to build on the strong momentum for the strong acknowledgement of NELD at COP30. We'll have now, I guess, a 45-minute window to have all of these discussions. We'll have some background context that'll be offered by our speakers, and then we'll have 2 short panel discussions before we open it up and close. So with those words, I'd like to introduce Erin, who is going to be providing an introductory overview of why counting NELD matters.
Thank you so much, Salate. I feel somewhat unworthy to be here because I haven't been involved as intimately in this work as you all have. I happen to be the founder and global lead of the Loss and Damage Collaboration, and we were commissioned by the Scottish Government to develop a report on how the Scottish Government spent the £10 million that it dedicated towards loss and damage. So I'm here in lieu of the Scottish Government to tell you a little bit about where that came from. So in 2012, the Government of Scotland established a climate justice fund. And what's really cool about that is that it was really a push from civil society. So the special advisor to the then First Minister had worked with Oxfam, and so he really pushed for this fund to be established. And subsequently in 2019, Scotland developed its current Climate Change Act, which is underpinned by climate justice principles. That same year, they had a theory of change workshop where they established what climate justice means to them. So this is really novel for a government from a developed country. In the lead up to COP26 in Glasgow, there was a really big push from civil society in Scotland, particularly an organization or a collective of organizations called Stop Climate Chaos Scotland. So they really pushed for the Scottish Government to take a stand on loss and damage finance. And as a result, the Scottish Government pledged £2 million for loss and damage at COP26. This was really important because it came at a time when developing countries were calling for a loss and damage finance facility. And that really helped kind of boost momentum. And it also encouraged philanthropy to also start to become involved in funding loss and damage. At COP27, the Scottish Government pledged a further £5 million, which was dedicated towards non-economic loss and damage. So that's the portfolio of work we're here to talk about today. And in total, they've dedicated £10 million to loss and damage work across the globe. They funded projects including a project to help communities in southern Malawi respond to loss and damage from a series of cyclones that hit them subsequently. Cash transfers with Give Directly, also in southern Malawi. It helped establish a youth grant-making council under the Loss and Damage Youth Coalition, work on urban loss and damage from C40, thought leadership from the Stockholm Environment Institute, which helped inform the work of the NOW Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, 4 humanitarian emergency fund pilots, case studies from ICAD in Benin, Malawi, and Zambia on loss and damage at the national level, and work at the local level through the Communities First Pilot Fund and the NELD program from the Climate Justice Resilience Fund. So some of the key lessons that came from this report included the importance of locally led and community-centered responses, addressing the full spectrum of loss and damage, rapid and sustained support, recognizing the synergies between adaptation and loss and damage, influencing global policy, contributing to knowledge and strengthening leadership. And it's really important to also note that the focus on non-economic loss and damage also came from a global gap, but also from the initial work that was done with the £2 million pledge, which really revealed some of the non-economic impacts that were being experienced in those communities. So this work is answering some of the questions that are really fundamental to loss and damage, such as what happens when you lose everything, when your body, your mind, your soul feel wrung out of life, filled with grief for all that is lost? What happens when you have to leave the land your ancestors have lived on for millennia? What happens when everything you knew, the way you always have been and done, is lost? What happens when tensions rise within your community because resources become scarce? These are just a few of those questions that we need to answer to better understand and better address non-economic loss and damage. And before I close, I just want to say that the Loss and Damage Collaboration is very honored to be part of this work as the advocacy partner. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Erin. Why don't you stay? You'll be on the panel in a moment. My name is Heather McRae, and I'm the Executive Director of the Climate Justice Resilience Fund. It's been our privilege as CJRF to house the £5 million for non-economic loss and damage that the Scottish Government allocated in 2023. And we have deployed that funding through, first of all, a very participatory model that has reached out primarily in 4 regions around the world. We've been working in the Bay of Bengal, we've worked with UUSC in the Pacific, and we've worked in East Africa. And most recently, we have just announced a set of grants in the Andean region. These are 4 different places with very different, in many respects, climate profiles. But we're finding there's some definite themes around what comes up when it comes to non-economic loss and damage. At this point, the portfolio consists of $5.5 million worth of grants. And when you count it all up, it's 65 different grants all over these regions I described. In addition, we've structured our program with a set of learning partners who you're going to hear from fairly soon. ICAD in Asia, UUSC in the Pacific, and then South North in Africa. The importance of learning, given the newness of non-economic loss and damage as a theme. We really haven't seen this funded to a large extent in the past, and so learning by doing has been the name of the game for this program. At CJRF, we have been emphasizing 3 constituents who are on the front lines of climate change. Women, as you know, are key players given the gender differences of how climate impacts are experienced. Youth, of course, are those most who will live with climate change and feel the effects of its impacts for the longest. And then indigenous peoples who live so intimately with the land and have so much knowledge of the climate inherited over so many generations. So our grant making has focused on these 3 categories of people, and we've been working with people from these constituencies to develop participatory models for deploying the funding in ways that directly address the loss and damage needs that communities experience. And I need to emphasize this as much as I can. When it comes to non-economic loss and damage, this is very particular. How communities experience loss, what losses matter, and what aspects of activities, what activities are needed, really differ a great deal and really need to be determined by those who are experiencing the work. We're going to have a more detailed conversation with representatives of our learning partners in a moment, but I wanted to talk about a few early lessons that we have been seeing at CJRF as we look across this broad, diverse portfolio of work. The first is that non-economic loss and damage really needs dedicated resources. It gets left out too often, and if it's not named and centered, it doesn't get addressed. And that leaves the recovery and the adaptation and the process of dealing with loss and damage incomplete and missing some really important components. We're finding that non-economic loss and damage is very linked with adaptation and with economic loss and damage. And while it's important to have distinct resources, we also can't burden communities with the need to differentiate. Almost everything we have funded has been funded in a package of multiple activities, some of which are, you might consider, economic, and some of which really are quite intangible and invisible until they're named as non-economic loss and damage. And so it's really important not to burden communities with the unnatural process of separating out NELD from other forms of loss and damage or other forms of building resilience. The third lesson is really important for funders to recognize that funding non-economic loss and damage really may not look like funding climate change impacts. This attention to climate change becomes self-defeating sometimes when what you're funding is so near and dear to people's hearts and their livelihoods and their ways of being and living. An example comes from our partners in Uganda, IDIWA, where they're working with women who are needing to walk longer and longer distances to get water. And what they're finding is that these women are taking rides from truckers in exchange for sex. And the risk of HIV is the non-economic loss that needs to be addressed. So our partners are working on sexual health and reproductive rights. They're working on HIV prevention. And for a funder looking from the outside, this might not look like climate change, but it is addressing the loss of dignity, the risk to health, and really critical, very personal losses that women are experiencing in this very challenging trade-off forced by the loss of water in their communities. To kind of sum up, it's one of the other really important things to know about non-economic loss and damage is that it takes you very quickly into the kinds of systemic changes that can really foster lasting resilience. So when non-economic losses and damages, when trauma, for example, mental health impacts, loss of culture, spiritual losses, losses related to religious practice or ritual, when these are addressed, people have a kind of resilience they just can't have without them. And that lasting resilience for people and their communities is a really important investment that ratchets through a whole system. We're finding that this lens, the lens of non-economic loss and damage, is leading our partners very much to holistic approaches. As I mentioned, it's often packages of quite unexpected integrated work that you'll hear about in more examples from the upcoming speakers. And these have lasting benefits. They're addressing dignity. They're addressing long-standing injustice. They're addressing marginalization in ways that economic investments don't always address. The most important thing we're seeing is really that there's a need for community-led approaches and finding partners and using funding modalities that really lift up community-led approaches is what's leading to interventions that can be rooted in dignity and in choice for people and for their families and for their communities. And this, for us, is the heart of what we're seeing as the most important aspect of addressing non-economic aspects of loss and damage. With that, I'd love to invite up our learning partners. We have one represented already here. Saqib, would you also join us? I'm sorry to say that 2 of our anticipated speakers could not join us. And so we're fortunate that the executive director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development is going to represent one of his staff. And why don't we kick it off with you, Saqib, if you could share what your team has been learning as you work with all of the partners on this program in Asia.
Thank you, Heather. And first of all, thank you all for being here. Great to see such a big crowd here. So my name is Saqib Haq, and as Heather mentioned, we're working on the Asia case studies for the program. So we work across the Bay of Bengal in the climate vulnerable coastal regions, and a large part of our case studies and grant making are focused on villages across the coastal region in Bangladesh through Khulna, Satkhira, and through the coastal regions of Odisha in India. And one thing that when we started off the program with CJRF through the Scottish Grant Program is we were very, very cognizant as a learning partner that this is not only just a downstream sort of end beneficiary type of learning, not only learning from communities, what is it that they're doing, not being very extractive in that learning process, but also upstream. What are things that we as grantors, we as regional partners, we as intermediaries, the roles that we play, what are some of the ways that we can be more participatory? Because one of the lessons that we've been fighting for quite a long time is that a lot of these grant making and activities that go to these communities, as Heather mentioned, can be very, very restrictive because it's very onerous to do that proposal writing, to do that sort of reporting, that monitoring. And we've tried to make that as participatory as possible with our partners. So the grants that we've given out, we try to learn the lessons through monthly meetings, through videos, through blogs, trying to make sure that this is something that is interactive, that they're just doing more as a conversation rather than feeling it as a monthly report that needs to be submitted and the next grant does not come through. But then also from a grant maker, what are the things that we can synthesize from this? What are the ways that we can put this into other funders that might be looking into this? So we've been very, very grateful for CJRF and the Scottish grant government for this grant, but there are other funders that are looking to do this. They're trying to get into this space. They're looking into what are the non-economic losses and damages that they should be assisting and supporting in, and how can their grants and their programs also learn from these sorts of lessons. And so this is a two-way learning that we've been trying to focus on, and we've been very, very successful, I think, in identifying, as Heather mentioned, a number of different ways that we think that grant fundings and funders need to be reflexive to the communities, because on the ground, a lot of these issues don't really have a segmentation between resilience, between adaptation, between this is economic loss and damage and non-economic loss and damages. These are things that people are doing as a betterment of a quality of their own life. And if we're able to view it with that lens, that was one of the biggest learnings from our end, is that if we're able to see the grants as an improvement of quality of life, then I think the funders would have a much better way of trying to assess the impact that they have. I'm happy to take any more questions on specifics later on, but I'll hand back to Heather if that's all right.
Thanks very much. We had hoped to have our partners from South North call in via video, and that's proven not to be possible right now. But I wanted to share some of the highlights of what they've been learning across the East Africa portfolio. They wanted to share that the key takeaway from the engagement they've had with grantee partners in East Africa is that the impacts of NELD sit alongside other, often long existing community resilience challenges. So, for example, they're seeing climate change and loss and damage intersect with disability and inclusion challenges. People with disabilities are facing some of the most challenging losses and damages. Loss of indigenous and cultural heritage has been ongoing for a very long time, but there's ways in which now climate change is accelerating that and is harming people because of that pre-existing loss. And then finally, conflict and displacement are really important elements of, again, something that's quite intertwined with climate change and is exacerbating loss in a way that offers a multiplier effect. So the approaches that we're seeing across the East Africa grantee partners is to address NELD holistically and to try to solve several other community resilience challenges at the same time. This is a key takeaway. There's a set of slides from the East Africa learning process that I'm happy to share with anyone in the audience who would like to go into more depth on what South-South-North would have contributed if we'd been able to get them online. With that, let me hand off to Salote Sogo from UUSC and the Pacific.
Thank you, Heather. So UUSC works with 9 partner organizations, community-based organizations in 6 countries across the Pacific Islands. So Tuvalu, Kiribati, Fiji, the Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea, and the Marshall Islands. And we've been in partnerships for the past decade, so over 10 years. And that, I think, is really a key lesson, I guess, for the funding to respond to loss and damage, for the Santiago network, is to really leverage the existing relationships and partnerships that organizations and funders and institutions, academia, and so forth already have with frontline communities. Because without that relationship and without that trust, the sustainability of any initiative, whether it's funding or strategic or programmatic, won't last. That's been a key lesson that we've had to learn in the hard ways, but also something that is applicable, I guess, across the world with all the partners that are involved with CJRF. I think secondly, what has been emphasized by Mr. Huck is really the nuances at the local level between loss and damage, non-economic loss and damage, the definitions of gender, the definitions of intersectionality with community groups that are doing the work. And that's sort of the overlying sort of structural inequities is really deeply rooted in structural issues. Colonialism in the Pacific, all of the nations were colonized at one point by some country in the global north. The militarization and the impacts of that still occur to this day. And you put climate change impacts on top of that, the non-economic loss and damage is already there. We just don't say it in technical words like that. That's really deep human loss and human trauma that a lot of the communities have experienced, ancestors, current generations, and what will be passed on to future generations. And that's really at the core of how communities have developed their strategies, looking toward the past in order to address the future. And that's sort of a common element that all of our partners have brought to the table. And thirdly, we're trying to define NELD through the WIM-XCOM, these expert groups. We cannot continue with that because the real impacts of NELD and its definition can only be defined in a meaningful way by those communities that are experiencing it and the communities that are working with them to really define the strategies. So I think that those are the 3 key lessons that we would definitely want to bring to COP30 and as a funder ourselves. But I think some of the key lessons that have emerged from the strategies and the experiences that our partners have shared is really to look at the impact of the strategies on future generations, those that have yet to be born. 1, culture is resilience. I've repeated this many times, and I'm going to repeat it again. We always say that culture resilience is climate resilience, but culture is resilience. And in the context of NELD, that's really important to emphasize. It's not something that only indigenous peoples need to practice. It needs to be embedded and centralized in how we are talking about NELD at the global level. Number 2, there's, when we decided to to support our partners through this grant, we really wanted to create a platform where the partners told us how the funds should be distributed. So we really look to them to define the values, not the modalities. What are the values that we should be incorporating throughout the process? Because I think at the global level, there's a very myopic view of what modality should look like, right? Funds should go here, 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 blah, blah, blah. Values define processes in defining modalities, I think is really critical to start with. And so the value of respect, reciprocity, equality, and equity. And what does that look like at the global level? And that's what our partners have taught us in the Pacific, because that's really embedded in the identity of being a Pacific Islander and their connection to land and what's lost. And I think, thirdly, and this is my last point, is, we've worked with partners over the years to really develop both concrete, measurable impacts of the work that they do on the ground to address the issues of displacement and relocation. We've also been in a position to see how operationally each organization changes over time. Young people come in, they learn, they go, they move, they become leaders, and that's been really an inspiring part of the work that we do. But it's also very traumatizing. NELD is traumatizing work, and that burden is not only on the shoulders of the frontline communities they serve, but it's also on the organizations that do the work. And so we really need to think about NELD funding in a holistic way, as Heather mentioned, but also looking to support the capacity, the mental health, the well-being, the wellness of the communities that are doing this work on the front lines. And I'll stop there.
At this point, I think we all need to take our seats, and I will hand off to the next panel. We have CJRS board member Pato Kelesitek joining us as moderator. Come on up, Eunice, and we have everyone, right? Oh yeah, Joydeep, you're up.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Heather. Thanks to the opening panel. So, like Heather said, my name is Pato Kilisitse, and I'm one of the board members from the Climate Justice Resilience Fund. And joining me today, joining me for this conversation are some of our partners from our non-economic loss and damage work that we've done. Starting on my left, please welcome Holland Panapa. He's the project officer of Tuvalu Climate Action Network. You guys are not welcoming my panel, and then my panel's not going to want to talk, and then you're not going to get the conversation I wanted you to have. Right. And then our next speaker, one of our implementing partners, is Eunice Leopario. She is the executive director of Baringo Women and Youth Organization in Kenya. Give her a round of applause. And then lastly, we have got Joydeep Gupta, who is from India and the director of Earth Journalism Network. Thanks for playing along, guys. So in this conversation, we've been talking about how for a very long time, non-economic loss and damage was so neglected, and through the work that we've done, it's been such a great opportunity to do some of that work, and we think it's important to have this conversation once again. Today, maybe focusing on narratives and the importance of not just funding it, but narratives as well. So we'll start first to speak about narratives from journalism, from some of the preservation work you've done, and from some of the work you've done in Tuvalu. getting straight into the conversation, I'll start with you, Holland. So there's been a significant media narrative around the rising sea levels in the Pacific Islands, specifically Tuvalu, where you're from. Can you maybe expand for us on how Tuvalu communities have been experiencing non-economic loss and damage caused by sea level rises, but also if you could also highlight the role that this increasing media narrative has played in addressing that?
Thank you so much for the question. I guess my engagement today,
A bit closer.
I would first talk about the saltwater intrusion. Of course, it's really obvious that sea level rising is really affected Tuvalu, and associated with the impact of sea level rise would be the loss of the it's done. Thank you.
Sorry, I think that may have thrown you off a bit. So the question basically was, there's been so much attention being given by the media to Tuvalu. Can you share with us some of the experiences of the communities when it comes to loss and damage and the role that the media has played in bringing attention to that?
Tuvalu has been doing a lot of advocacy on the issue of non-economic loss and damage, and
We can call it NELD, okay?
Yes, we
So
can
this is
call
the
it
glossary, guys.
NELD.
Instead
Sure,
of
yes.
non-economic, we're going to say NELD.
The media has been doing a very good job in trying to flag that out into at the global stage, and of course this really helps the Tuvalu in terms of providing financial assistance towards communities that are being affected by sea level rise. And with regards to NELD, saltwater intrusion, I really want to highlight this as this is one of the most impact that is affecting Tuvalu right now. And through the sea level rise, traditional knowledge are being lost. And why traditional knowledge are being lost is that we no longer cannot plant trees. We have information, we do know traditional knowledge on how to fertilize the soil, and because different communities have different way of fertilizing soil, and it's being passed down through generations, and we no longer cannot plant anymore.
So the plant, sorry, you said the sea level rise, the saltwater invasion is then resulting in you not being able to plant food.
Yes.
Oh, so now it's also bringing in the problem of food security. Thank you so much for highlighting that. So now to invite Eunice into the conversation. I know, and off of what you just said around trying to preserve some of that knowledge, I know your organization has been conducting engagement and sensitization activities with the community to develop a cultural documentation center to house cultural archives and indigenous community knowledge. Can you please maybe share some of that, looking at how all the way from Kenya to Pacific, it seems to be a challenge. Please share more about the work you've been doing on that.
Thank you so much. My name is Eunice Lepario from Kenya, from a small minority community in Kenya. I had Heather calling I'm from the Maasai, but we are the sub-tribe of the Maasai. What I mean when I say we are the subtribe of the Maasai, we speak the same dialect, and but our traditions is a bit different. But we are brothers and sisters. We can say we are cousins. So thank you so much, CJRF. This is my first time to attend COP. I've never attended, and it's a privilege to me and to my community. I know they are waiting to hear the results from, especially from the indigenous community, like the Amazon people in Brazil. For us in Kenya, coming from a very minority community, we are just to put it on light. We have been affected by the climate change, the water rising of Lake Baringo. My community resides around the Lake Baringo, and as all of us we know, the climate change and the changing patterns, the water tend to rise every day. Since like 20 years now, my community has been displaced, we have been distracted, and many things have been happening, and coming from a very minority community, it's very hard to convince the community, not the government, to come in and chip in and even relocate my people. So, back to your question. Well, as an indigenous community, we were disoriented, or we have been displaced in many things. Like for the cultural sites, we lost a lot of cultural sites as a patriarchal community, and even the traditional community, we no longer access where we used to go and perform our rituals, where we go to get the medicinal plants, where even we do the circumcisions, where we go and worship our own God. So it's a big challenge for us now that the water is rising every day. In fact, where I was born now, it's a fishing ground. I don't have a family. I had to shift to another place because of the displacement. Secondly, we lost like for example, for me, I lost an ancestral home where I used to call home, where I buried my father, where I buried my ancestors. We no longer access them. They are inside the water. And it's very traumatizing for us. When we talk of NELD, it doesn't mean that we talk of, when we talk of climate effects, it's not that only we talk those which we can see, like the destruction of the homes, the destruction of the infrastructures, but even the cultural, even my livelihood, even my way of life has been distracted, because I used to be I am the pastoralist, and now I'm forced to go to another alternative livelihood, like going to farming, because we have a lot of water around us. So it really distracted us, and those are the challenges which as a community we are facing now. And thanks for the CGRF for coming in this year. And the fund for NELD we have just received recently. And as you said, we are going to, first we thought of having El Chamus biocultural protocol. We are developing that, very soon we'll develop that document which will guide us as a community, which will protect even our boundary, which will protect even our resources which are inside our territory, which will protect even our identity, which will even show us, will show the community and even the international community that even if our instructors, our ancestral land has been submerged, when we have this document, we can still trace where we were those days. So, as an organization, we are going down to the community. We will engage. We will engage the Council of Elders, because we are governed by Council of Elders within the community. We will engage the women. We will engage the youth, people with disability, and even the external, the national government and the county government. So, for me, I can say this is a plus for us as a community, because we'll have a document which will show that this is the Chams community. This is us.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And welcome to your first COP, Eunice.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think the more we tell these stories, the more we see things that we otherwise would have never even thought about because they don't directly affect us. And I think what really stood out to me about what you said of it's breaking families. You've had to relocate, and it's not just breaking you away from your family now. This is breaking families away for generations to come. And thank you so much for the project that you're doing to make sure that we're protecting against this. And now back to narratives, the journalist in the room driving narratives. What would you say the role of the media is when it comes to, what's their role when it comes to bringing NELD to the global climate agenda? And why is it important?
Thanks. Well, okay. It's part of our job because it's part of our job to speak truth to power, and that's so. If this is what's happening, it's part of our job to show that, and it's something that's happening new, and therefore it's news, and therefore it becomes part of our job. I have to tell you that I am not a fan of the phrase non-economic loss and damage, nor of NELD, because we have repeatedly found that it's a continuum. When your village cemetery gets flooded out, as Eunice pointed out, and I've seen similar flooded out cemeteries, and you cannot live there anymore, it leads to trauma of the kind that it's often put in the NELD box. But then you need to go to a psychiatrist and you have to pay money. It becomes an economic loss. So these silos need to be broken. So I do not see this as something that's just non-economic. It is very important that we have brought attention to these issues which were underreported, very, very badly underreported. I'll give you another example of what I'm talking about. All over the world, whether it's in Tuvalu or in the Amazon or in Asia, school buildings are used as storm shelters. When storms come and hit, school buildings are used as storm shelters. Hardly any attention is paid to the school days lost as a result. The school days lost as a result can be seen as a non-economic loss and damage, but it is ultimately also something that's affecting the education of the school children and ends up having economic consequences. If you are poor in that, yes, there are losses that are almost impossible to quantify, and that is probably non-economic, like cultural loss, in the sense of we have been reporting on the fact that in the world's largest mangrove forest, which straddles the boundaries of Bangladesh and India, the Sundarbans, in that forest, you can hardly do folk theatre anymore because everybody who used to be doing folk theatre has been forced to migrate out of the place. So there's hardly anybody left for rehearsals. And the same goes for folk songs. So I don't know whether folk theatre may not have an easy to quantify amount. Folk songs do. Biodiversity does, as we heard in the case of Tuvalu. When sea level rises, you lose your medicinal plants. Your traditional knowledge is gone. And when you lose your medicinal plants, you have to buy stuff from the market. That's got economic implications.
Thank you so much, Jaideep. You know, the example that you gave of the school has brought a completely new angle for me to appreciate of this, when we say loss and damage, usually we're thinking historic. But those historic costs have now opened space for there to be present losses like we're seeing with education. And then if children are not educated, that's then future losses, which is, it's a bit scary. It's really, really scary. And then back to you. This is now our final round of questions. Do you think how can journalism help to shift from, you know, the angle that you don't like, that you expanded on just now, to the to a better angle?
Yeah, I'll tell you why I'm not a fan of this phrase. Because the moment you say non-economic, policymakers lose interest. They say, oh, what are we supposed to do about it? And that's why it's important to talk about it in a continuum. But when you can explain it to them, and that's part of our job as journalists, to bring to the fore what everybody's doing here, the excellent work they're finding out. We are the bridge between the communities and the policymakers. Okay? So, and we have found repeatedly that when we do, it has impacts. We started reporting on the health impacts of your drinking water slowly going saline. This is like, you know, the frog in the warming vessel syndrome. You don't realize that when you're on the coast and the sea level is rising and the water is going more and more saline. You are drinking it every day, so you don't realize how saline it has become. What's happening is that everybody around every coast all over the world now has high blood pressure. Just check, you'll find that. And high blood pressure is bad for everybody. It's very bad for pregnant women. It can lead to preeclampsia. So these are both non-economic and economic losses. So yes, it's part of our job to bring that to everybody's notice. And that's what we have been doing.
Thank you so much, Joydeep. Just listening to you, so many insights. So it's what we're turning from just calling it a term like NELD, putting the humans behind it, the stories behind it, because that's what we care about, the humans. That's what politicians care about. Thank you so much. And then back to you, Eunice. Joydeep was just talking about some of the stories that they've been highlighting through media to make it connect and ensure that there's action on it. Please share with us how you shared a little bit with us, but maybe expanding on it, how the impacts of climate-induced flooding have affected the preservation of culture and heritage in Baringo County in Kenya. And how do you see the development of biocultural protocol guidelines helping?
Okay, I think, as you said, I've shared a bit of how it has really distracted us. And losing a culture, losing your identity, losing where you call your home, it's very traumatizing. Like, as we talk now, we have 150 households which they are in IDP camps. And for the last 5 years.
So IDP is internally displaced people.
Sorry. Internally displaced persons. So we have 150 households from my community. This community, they live where when it rains at the island, it flooded all the way to the Lake Baringo, and we are the only community will be affected. So as we talk, there are a lot of trauma because our young girls, our young generation, our young boys, they are in the urban centers looking for jobs. As I heard from the Uganda, some of them are they're even selling themselves. We call them selling themselves for sex so that they can get at least a living. And coming from a very strict community with a traditional bond, for us, we can say we are losing our culture, our values. So destruction is huge in my community. And again, coming from a very minority community, we will lose our identity. We will be overtaken by the larger community. So developing in terms biocultural protocol for us, and as we talk, the community I'm praising, because We have a lot of investors who are coming to my community to do farming because we have a lot of water and a lot of idle land in the upper land. So they are pumping water from the lake to the island, to the higher side, and we tend to lose our girls being married to the other community. And for us, being very few, 30,000 people, a population of 30,000, we advocate for them at least to remain in our community so that maybe in future we'll be able to elect a member of parliament, because as we talk, we don't have any member of parliament and we don't have our own constituency. We are being governed by other communities. So having this document, it will make us, at least will make us together. We'll come down and sit together with the elders and the younger generation, and they'll be able to tell us, the elders will be able to tell us what we are supposed to do, what is in our marriages, what contains in our blessings when we do the blessings, what contains and when we want to go to the lake, because we go to the lake to pray when there's drought, when there is disease outbreaks, when there is anything, any calamity. So we will bring, for me, I can say it will bond us, it will bring the unity which we lost when we are distracted with water.
Thank you so much for bringing that. And again, these human stories allow us to appreciate another angle of how much more young women are so vulnerable to exploitation because of what's come up. Speaking to what Joy Deep said of it's not, the bill is not closed. The bill is still raking up when it comes to loss and damage. And then you referenced women. Coming back to you, Holland. There's work that you're doing in Tuvalu to address the loss of culture and traditional practices, especially among Tuvaluan women. Please tell us more about that for us to appreciate how other people are responding to this.
Thank you. Tuvalu, the work that we did in Tuvalu basically targeted women organization, and one way that we've contributing towards the global climate action agenda is that we are advancing the gender action plan, and the other one is that the other one is that loss and damage. Loss and damage is the last pillar, or the third pillar of climate change. And so through empowering communities and especially women to revive the traditional way of, to revive and to preserve the traditional way of handicraft, making handicraft and all, would really eliminate the saying that knowledge will get lost in a few years. And yes, that's it.
And thank you so much for also bringing, we are at COP, and I hadn't acknowledged that so far. And I think brilliant of you to bring in that connection of the loss and damage finance facility, the gender action plan. Oasis was so strong in Sham on just bringing loss and damage to life. Congratulations again. We were led by Oasis, and you guys did such an amazing job on that. Thank you for bringing that to the conversation, because that's where it really, it's not where it starts, but within the COP process. That influence has then also built some of the groundwork that has brought us this conversation today. Unfortunately, we are now out of time, so I'm going to keep the session closing so short. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences with NELD. I hope those who are part of the conversation today, the sponsors of the hub, wink, wink, other philanthropies, see the importance of funding NELD. We've been doing it for about a year and a half. about 2 years. We've done some, we've piloted a lot of different ways of how it can be funded as Climate Justice Resilience Fund. We are excited to have conversations on the learnings that we've had, should you be looking into channeling some resources towards NELD. And with that, we come to the end of our session. Thank you so much for sharing pieces of you.
So much.
Thank you, Pato, and thank you to all of our partners who've contributed to this really innovative and important body of work. Thank you to everyone for coming and to the Resilience Hub for hosting us. We really feel that this is a really important, critical part of getting global climate action right. And without addressing non-economic loss and damage, we're going to really struggle to build resilience for the long run. So thank you for the attention to this issue. And I'm happy to follow up anyone who would like more information. I'm happy to point you towards specific partners, specific information sources, and a recent brief that we have. We're at the close, and have a good rest of your COP, everyone.